Thanks for joining us for yet another House of PMO session. Just in case you've just wandered down the wrong corridor, here you are, it's the House of PMO. And we're doing this session today. I'm just going to give you just a little bit of preamble. I just wonder if any of you remember this, but at last year's PMO conference, we did some boards on the wall. And those boards were all about trying to pick off certain challenge areas that we know PMO people have. And I mean, resource management is nearly always there in the top, top three of the things that causes, many problems and challenges. And what we did at the conference is start to get people's insights. And over time after the conference, we carried on building it. And that's what we essentially started to fill up. One of the things that we said is, what have you tried that helped? Was actually right in the bottom corner there in one of the love hearts is an organization called Prosymmetry, and they are all focused on resource management. And luckily for us, they have a really great guy that is an expert in this field around resource management. So what we wanted to do is start off a series. So this is the first of 4, throughout the year, up to the end of the year, dipping into some areas around resource management. So we started off with something which is, I think, quite, it's an interesting one. It's very niche, isn't it? So I think sometimes when I look at some of these titles, but this is just totally where a lot of people are right now, which is, not only is that resource capacity side of stuff, but also this whole business agility, agile, and also, obviously scaled agile. So yeah, it's very much, one of those subjects that we're all kind of like, floundering a little because there's not that much out there in the field. So today we've got Lloyd Norman joining us. How you doing, Lloyd? Are you okay? Yeah,
I'm okay if I can unmute, right? Yes, I'm very pleased with you today.
Always a challenge.
Yeah, happens every time. But yeah, so Lloyd's joining us. Where are you joining us from, Lloyd? Are you over in Texas?
I'm actually in Salt Lake City, America.
Oh,
so okay. in the great state of Utah, home of national parks and wonderful skiing. So happy to be here.
Yeah, well, the reason why I said Texas is obviously Prosymmetry are based predominantly over there, and have been a great supporter for the PMO community here in the UK, certainly through assistance around our conferences and things. So Lloyd, take it away. Why don't you tell everybody, bring up your session, tell us all a little bit about you in terms of your.
Of course. Shall I go ahead and start sharing here?
Yes, please. Yeah.
All right. Let me bring up my screen here. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so a little bit about myself. I've been around for a while. I've been in various PMO leadership roles, worked for a lot of different well-known entities, from IBM to the federal government to others. Most recently, I worked with a large financial institution, roughly for the last decade before coming to work for Prosymmetry, and was responsible for setting from the ground up a resource planning capability. We had about, give or take, 2,000 IT and operations resources. At any given time, we had 300 to 400 initiatives flowing through our pipeline. And the challenge we had was resource planning was essentially driven by the finance part of the business. We do wonderful at roadmap planning for the year, but consistently we'd have challenges where we, at the end of the year, the CFO would walk in and say, "You missed your CapEx targets," right? And it's because we didn't have enough resources to deliver on the commitments that we made at the first of the year. And so essentially, I from the ground up and it really was a fortunate position to be in. To be able to start with a clean slate and say, what's the right approach to doing this? How can we best coordinate delivery across agile teams, cross-functionally provided operational entities that provide both operations support as well as project support, all of those things together. And so we did that. I actually went out, did an evaluation, and brought in Prosymmetry on trial Tempest Resource is the product that's developed by Prosymmetry, and have been working with that for a number of years. So lots of lessons learned along the way, both before I entered that role, during that role, and as I've had the chance over the last couple of years in my position here as a vice president in Prosymmetry to consult with clients really globally about the resource planning issues that gate delivery. So very happy to be here today. And Liz, if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Perfect. So a couple of things I want to point out. I'm going to be moving back and forth between a few different entities here. You're going to see me going out to scaledagileprimeric.com. I am an SPC, essentially a safe practice consultant. I'm very fond of their approach to taking the best practices of Agile at a team level and moving that up to an organization level. So I'm going to sort of pre-announce my bias there, but fully admit that the concepts that I'm talking about today are completely germane and relevant to both waterfall delivery and especially hybrid delivery. We have hundreds of clients globally. Let me pop out here and make sure. Okay, so relative to Prosymmetry, I consult literally with hundreds of clients globally on a regular basis. And this isn't necessarily a Prosymmetry commercial, but I want to provide a little bit of context here. We help enterprises, organizations, continuously align their business strategy with delivery and resource capacity. What I'm going to be talking about today is how resource capacity is absolutely fundamentally the driver behind portfolio flow, regardless of your implementation methodology. Most of the clients and prospects that I talk to are actually in a hybrid environment. And I say by most, it's well over 90%. There are some entities, some work that just makes sense to do in a waterfall fashion, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's actually a best practice in my humble opinion. But the other thing I want to point out on this slide is not just, hey, these are some of the clients that we have, and you can see their logos, but please pay attention to the verticals there, because regardless of the industry that you're in, the concepts that we're going to be talking about today are relevant to anybody with a portfolio of work. And it's very interesting, the kind of organizations that we come across with portfolios of work. You've got large pharmaceutical companies that are building products. You obviously have technology and IT organizations that support all of these firms. You have large audit organizations who actually have to create an annual audit plan. And it looks very much like an annual project roadmap, if you will. So regardless of the vertical that you may be in, again, today we're going to be talking about how to improve flow, making sure that your people are always working on the highest priority work continuously without burning out your talent. Okay, let's set some baselines here, which hopefully we can all agree on. Let's think about our personal lives and start from there. I would submit to you that it's reasonable to assume that where we allocate our resources defines our priorities. Now, hopefully this is not a shocking concept for most here on the call, but it's true, right? I mean, there's certain things that we must have. There's other things that we would like to have, and there's other things that are purely aspirational. Business goes through the same prioritization, and where they allocate their capacity, where they are reserving their resources, their talent, their financial capital, their human capital, actually does define their priorities. This is also, I would submit to you, why it's so interesting to see plan versus actual. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where executives who struggle because they claim there's a disconnect between strategy and execution are surprised when I show them where their technology resources or whatever resources they may be responsible for are actually spending their time. I'll never forget sitting in a meeting where we had planned an hour meeting with an executive vice president, and 4 minutes in, when I showed him the actuals, he leaned to the left and said, "Why are we still working on this project? We killed that 4 months ago." And well, the whole meeting went sideways at that point, but it was very illuminating, right? And so oftentimes, it's important to realize that even though business goes through an exercise like this, and this is a slide directly from scaledagileFramework.com, talking about participatory budgeting, which is a very effective way for business lines to get together and look at all the forces that are driving business decisions, and look forward 3 or 6 months and say, this is where we ought to be spending our money from a resource perspective. What value streams are we going to be funding? What organizations are we going to be funding? Ultimately, what epics and projects are we going to be funding along with our operational work? Just saying here that it's capacity driven, right? Whether it's financial capacity or human capital, it is in fact capacity driven. Now, the same thing happens at a portfolio level. If you look at a 1-year timeline for a portfolio, it's pretty clear that whether you're implementing things from a waterfall perspective or from a pure agile perspective, a couple things happen. As you're sort of off on the left here, when you get within roughly 90 days of execution, hopefully from a resource planning perspective, you're getting your resources pretty much locked in. If you're familiar with the SAFE processes, they actually have a formal ceremony for this, a planning increment, if you will. A PI planning event is what it's called as well. And it's there essentially. They go out and they look at what are the features that the business wants. We prioritize those, and then we get our teams who are involved in this planning meeting to make sure that we actually have the ability to commit to that. So typically, again, regardless of delivery methodology, you'll find from a resource planning perspective, these forecasts tend to be very fixed. What our position is, look, if you don't start shaping your pipeline before you hit this 90-day planning boundary, call it what you will, call the methodology what you will, you're going to have challenges. The importance of coordinating across value streams, across the entire portfolio really cannot be understated. And it all comes back to capacity. Because typically, just think about this, if you go ask an executive, and I do this all the time as I meet with executives globally, just ask them a simple question: what gates your delivery? Is it your funding or is it your people? And invariably, I've never had anyone come back and tell me, no, this is a funding issue. It's always an access to talent issue. Whether your talent is organized in teams, roles, people, doesn't matter. So if you don't start looking out here where forecasts are more flexible and farther out even fluid, you're never going to be ready here. There's never any question that when people are delivering, which typically in an agile environment, which is where we're going to be talking about mostly today. But again, please remember that the concepts that we're talking about today are still germane to waterfall delivery. People are typically doing detailed work decomposition and story delivery out here using tools like Jira, ADO, those sorts of things. And that's all well and good. But I would submit to you, if you're not starting upstream by assigning capacity to your work flowing into the pipeline, that you're not going to be ready down here. You're going to wake up and see, oh, I assumed that compliance, audit, regulatory, legal, name the shared service of choice, is going to be ready for me here, but they're already committed to other things. Or perhaps there's seasonal issues. Have you ever tried to go work with finance and accounting in Q1 in the United States? Well, guess what? They're highly committed to getting out their 10Ks, commitments to the IRS, regulatory bodies. You've got to consider that in your longer term planning. I actually had a wonderful discussion with a chap in London last fall who was working with he was their safe practice consultant, helping this large financial organization stand up 300 agile teams. And good for him for doing so, right? But as we talked about this concept, he said, oh yeah, look, it's important to go out at least 12 months. You've got to essentially from the ability to satisfy the CFO, if nothing else, to give them a picture of expected CapEx. But I have to go out 18 months, and this was his concept, because I have so many teams that if we don't start coordinating that far out, we'll never be aligned when we come to our common planning event here. I thought that was a really interesting comment. So I'm a big advocate of going out at least 12 months. You assume, of course, that your forecasts are more fluid the farther out that you go, and they firm up as you come in. But if you don't do that, and you don't focus on aligning your capacity across your organization, you really greatly increase the risk of not having the right people in the right place at the right time here at this planning boundary. It starts really with roadmap planning. For those of you in the Agile domain, this is really the purview of your product managers. Let me just click on this for a minute. Again, I'm going right out to scaledagilepFramework.com. Let's give credit where credit's due. And if you look at some of their documentation, and I would really encourage you guys to go out and look at this, even if you're not adopting the SAFe framework. There is wonderful content here that you can learn from, I can assure you. But this concept of having longer term forecasts, it's so challenging to me when I'll sometimes meet people that are so team focused doing Agile delivery that they say, oh, we only need to plan for the next 90 days. Nothing could be further from the truth. Whether you like Scaled Agile Framework or not, you have to tip your hat to the fact that they've got 20 years swinging away at Agile delivery and scaling that throughout the organization. These are best practices directly from the SAFe organization, right? So the acknowledgement that it's important to have longer term roadmaps, and that those roadmaps need to be tied to portfolio capacity, if you will. So let me pop back here. So that's really the first step, making sure that your product personnel are actually aligning their roadmaps with capacity. Otherwise, think about it. I have seen some absolute work of arts in terms of the kinds of roadmaps that are delivered on a Visio diagram. But if they're not tied to your ability to actually deliver the work, then it's a wish list, right? It shows what you want to do as opposed to what you can do. Now, again, I'm going to defer back to Scaled Agile here, but these are common best practices, right? PMI advocates these things. There should be some sort of a routine portfolio sync where your folks, your planning folks, are getting together with the business saying, hey, on a recurring basis, we need to have a touch point here, saying, what's our available capacity? What are the changing business priorities? Interesting, again, I'm going to go pop right back out to scaledagilepFramework.com. Again, this whole section under lean portfolio management, if you're familiar with them, there's some great verbiage out here that talks about portfolio flow, right? And let me share this with you, if you will, from a capacity planning perspective.
Lloyd,
in the content.
Lloyd,
Hi.
we can't
Yes.
see you jumping out to another screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I'm basically just popping out to scaledagilepFramework.com. So let me pop back to my screen here. Essentially, what scaledagilepFramework.com advocates is making sure that you are tying your portfolio syncs to your capacity plan. Okay. Again, each one of these links is tied out to scaledagilepFramework.com. Here, this bullet really references the fact that they say you need to break down your work, essentially shirt size your work, your epics at a high level, and continue to refine your estimates over time as you get closer and closer to where you actually get your teams to commit to what they can do. So point of this discussion really is the concept of capacity planning. It's completely germane to portfolio delivery, especially Agile portfolio delivery. Also, you'll love this quote down here, basically tying Agile to lean concepts. This whole notion of responding to change over following a plan, it does in fact imply that there is a plan. And this is the plan I would submit to you. You need to be coordinating your capacity all along the way. All right, I would, again, this concept of adaptable delivery, business agility, if you will, I would submit to you that it actually requires continuous capacity planning. Well, why is that? Well, it's because your available capacity, if you're looking at this, for a team or for a role or even for an individual person, it's constantly fluctuating. You say, well, how does that work? Because business conditions change, right? And as it turns out, there may be some higher priority work that's in flight that's going to bump your planned availability. I remind executives quite frequently that their highest priority projects aren't, in fact, the things that they might think that they are. Oh, they're always about revenue generation or cost reduction, right? But running the business, meeting your SLAs, your regulatory requirements, KTLO, keep the lights on work, business as usual, whatever you want to call it, that is your number one priority. Again, worked for a large financial institution for a decade, and I can assure you people care about their money. And having access to their money is, in fact, the number one priority. Then you run into, high priority in-flight initiatives, right? Other work that may have started out as a lower priority than yours, but due to some changing business condition now is a higher priority. It really compels those that are looking at what's coming in the pipeline to make sure that that is a continuous exercise in capacity planning. From a flow perspective, let me put it this way. Again, if you are familiar with the portfolio Kanban approach to planning that's advocated by the Scaled Agile Framework folks, then this is going to look familiar to you. But this approach, again, is completely germane to whatever delivery methodology that you may be using. We've coined it as the SMART planning cycle. SMART meaning size your work, model your work, accelerate your flow, and then reserve your talent. And let's walk through that here real quickly. So from a scaled agile delivery perspective, right? These things on the right, sort of represent that. On the left is sort of classic waterfall planning. So let's start here. The first step in this process is simply reviewing your work. Business should be able to come in and say, look, from a cost perspective, this is at this phase in the process, it's almost always driven by finances. Look, what's it going to take for us to do this? Is this a bread box or is it a Volkswagen in terms of how big it is? And do we have some high level dependencies? And typically there's a go, no go decision based on, hey, sort of at a high level, is it feasible for us to do this work, if you will? If in fact it crosses that bar, now it's incumbent upon the business to do a little bit more analyzing, if you will. It's important to actually shirt size your work. You need to go in here and say, okay, so what strategic theme are we supporting? What OKR are we supporting? What roles and teams are needed to deliver this? Shirt size it at a high level, right? Once you do that, you are able to actually go in and say, assuming that I need these roles with these skill sets on this particular project or this particular epic, where can I sequence this? Now, I'm actually going to be showing some capabilities today from a modeling perspective, where you can use a fully interactive interface and say, look, let's sequence this work. Where can we actually get it in? What happens if we're able to test out and say, oh, and again, all of this happening in a virtual environment. You're not impacting your production portfolio at all. What happens if we go in and add capacity to the team? What if we bring on 2 contractors at $400,000 in a year, but we're able to bring in something that drives $5 million a year in revenue 18 months early? All of these things you can do so that when you go to your approval body, right, with your lean business case, again, if you're following sort of scaled agile methodology, or whatever your business case approval process looks like, it's reasonable. You should be getting questions about, okay, great. This looks financially feasible. Do we have the people to do it? Do we have the resources to do this? and when can we start it, right? What's really nice and comforting is for a PM to be able to walk in here, or an Epic owner or a product owner, and say, yes, we actually do have those resources. Here's the timeline. We're looking for approval now to make sure we can hit the ground running in October, when it's estimated that we're actually going to start this work in earnest, right? Meanwhile, you have the flexibility to start the work even earlier if you've already gotten it approved. So once you go through this process, then you just go execute, right? Again, in whatever software that you're using, Jira, ADO, your PPM tool of choice, Project Online, whatever it may be, you know that you've got people reserved to do that on given dates, right? That's why it's so important to let capacity drive your flow. Again, this is not, there's always a financial approval involved, but it's not what drives flow. It's the capacity of your people, their availability that drives flow. All right, so how do we do this? What I'll say is that, look, everybody's trying to do their best with resource capacity planning now. I've never walked into an organization that's invited me there to talk about resource planning and found that they're doing nothing. People are always doing something. Typically the Agile folks, they're very caught up in their Agile work decomposition tools, which is great, but they're not capacity planning tools. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, most of the entities here that are doing Agile delivery are actually doing their capacity planning in Excel. Obviously, if you're doing waterfall delivery, whether you're talking projects, studies, if you're pharmaceutical, whatever it may be, they're using typically some sort of a PPM tool. They're doing critical path scheduling, and that makes sense, but it's very tedious to go in task by task and assign resources to tasks. I'm not saying there's not a place for that, but what I am saying is from a high-level planning perspective, there's a better approach to that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Ops people, invariably it's Excel, right? The challenge is they're not sharing their information, right? So when ops people are being called off to work on projects, they're planning for that, but there's no global visibility to see what the impact of any particular work effort is on pending work that needs those resources. Not to mention the fact that nobody's got this tied to their OKRs, their strategic themes, those sorts of things. What we say is, look, don't stop what you're doing from a resource planning perspective. You have to be doing that, but please change where you're doing it. If you'll centralize that, you will open up the opportunity for everyone to have transparency, alignment of what you're doing and how best to deliver that across the portfolio. And it's not really that difficult to do, assuming you implement the right automation. So again, from a smart planning perspective, this is kind of how it works. When you have work coming in the pipeline, any new proposal, you size the work, model the work from a sequence perspective. I've already, my SMEs have told me who I need, what roles we need here, right? And again, you can actually do this down to the person level if you want. Typically at this level, it's done by role or by team, right? And then you say, look, let's sequence it. My automation should be able to show me where, in fact, I need to be able to start this work, how quickly I can start this work. We actually have integrated AI into our product that allows you to say, who are the best resources that are available during this time frame? And assuming they are available, when can you start this work? And then you can actually sit there and accelerate it, right? You can play with the notion of, where should I start this, right? I can push out other work. I can bring in other work. Once you develop your model, then simply reserve your talent, right? Go out to your production roadmaps and align your timing with your model, right? And this is a continuous process. It's ongoing. This is how you continuously design how your future is going to look. We talk about portfolio metrics, delivery metrics. You can actually go out and design what your future looks like, to a reasonable level of confidence, if you're in fact using capacity as the way to do that. So how do we do this? How do we size and align required capacity and coordinate value delivery across a complicated portfolio of work. This is just one example. Assuming, and again, this could be, features on a project, doesn't matter, but it's at a portfolio level. Let's assume that we're going to be introducing a new feature here, right? And we've sized that work, and we've determined that we've got some sort of enabling art, maybe it's data analytics, whatever it may be, but we're going to need team one from that art 50%. Now, let me comment here as well. From a scaled Agile perspective, I love their approach, but there's some things that I would refine, if you will. They like to plan at an art level. I find that with our clientele, their arts are almost never, ever cross-functional. I have talked to hundreds of people. I have met with exactly one client that had cross-functional arts, and they were doing this at an art level, right? There's nothing to say you can't do this at an art level. What we typically recommend is that you do this at a team level, because you've broken your art into teams for reasons. Typically, teams have unique skills, just like developers have a different set of skills from a QA automation engineer, right? They're related, but they're actually different. And so we highly recommend planning, in an Agile environment. If you want to make sure that you are optimizing flow, doing that at a team level. You also have to make sure that you are accounting for your internal partners. These people don't even know how to spell art, right? They're not familiar with safe delivery or Agile delivery. They want to help, but compliance, audit, regulatory, legal, all of which I would submit to you are quite capable of delaying delivery significantly if you don't work them into your planning process. You've got to make sure that when you're doing your capacity planning, that you are coordinating all operational entities that are going to be introducing risk to your schedule. All right, so how do we do that? First thing, make sure that you require some basic planning attributes for all your work and your resources. Whether you're talking epics or projects, there's certain things that you just have to have. When people would come to my organization and say, hey, we'd like to size some work, I'm like, great. We would hold sizing meetings on a regular basis. I held hundreds of these. I was fastidious. They would never last beyond 1 hour. I required the program manager who was bringing this work to my organization from a planning perspective to provide the kind of data that you see on the left. Tell me what's the priority. If you can't tell me the priority, at least tell me cost of delay, right? What's the strategic theme? Is it revenue generation, cost reduction, operational excellence? Is it tied to an OKR? What type of work is it? Are there any dependencies, right? This doesn't have to be a particularly long list, but you've got to be able to tie this back to your enterprise strategy. When it comes to your teams or people, just understand their capacity. Make sure that you have done a reasonable job coming up with a taxonomy of roles, if you will. You want to make sure that you're not too generic. Again, when I first started doing this at my previous employer, I worked with a group that had 12 mainframe developers. After 30 minutes of a conversation, I realized, oh, what we don't really have is 12 mainframe developers. That's your HR role. What we have is 4 mainframe developer deposits, 4 mainframe developers bank card, 4 mainframe developers item processing, and their skill sets were absolutely non-fungible, meaning it was going to take more than 90 days to cross-train these people. So when we started planning at that level, right, from a role perspective, it became very clear to us why certain roles there in that organization continued to gate delivery for our products. So you need to have a reasonable conversation about what level of skill we should be planning at. You should understand people's allocation to keep the lights on work as well, and who's their approving manager. So these are easy things to get to. This is not an overly complicated process. But look, I would tell people too, if you can't come to me and tie your work back to a strategic theme, then I'm not going to size this work. You go figure out some other way to do it. And that it quickly helps people to realize, look, you just have to have some fundamental planning elements if you're going to be effective from a resource planning perspective. If in fact you do that, now you get the wonderful consequence of having both vertical and horizontal alignment. Because when you align your capacity to your strategy, oh, it absolutely clarifies your risks, your sequencing, and how you should be flowing your work. So for example, you go in, you size your work, you do it by team and role, people if you want. Again, that typically would come later. But you've got features assigned to epics or projects that were assigned up to the correct portfolio or program tied to OKRs and strategy. Once you have this, you can look across the board from a future perspective and say 6-9 months down the road, here's what my flow distribution looks like. From a capacity perspective, here's the percentage of time I am spending on revenue generating work, risk reduction work, right? How many, how much of my work is expected to require LPM approval versus local approval, just based on the size and the thresholds that we have from a portfolio management perspective. Where do we have skills gaps, right? We were able to show skills gaps 7 to 9 months in advance with confidence. We were also able to coordinate with HR and say, who has aspirations to flow into roles that have these kinds of skills? Why wouldn't you want to start building an internal talent supply chain so that you can take people with institutional knowledge, keep them there, develop a culture of promotion from within? That all happens by having visible skills gaps early enough to be able to do something about it. Even if you're not going to be able to use your own talent, for heaven's sakes, it takes months, to bring on people with the right skill set, especially if you're looking at specialized roles. From a funding perspective, right? If you're looking at how I'm going to be proportioning my costs into the future across value streams or organizations, again, you've got to have a reliable look at your portfolio and how it ties back to your strategic theme. By the way, good automation will allow you to tie into other systems that can feed this data for you. We obviously have Jira, ADO plugins, that sort of a thing, but very common for us to tie into HR systems, to PPM tools, right? No point in double entering this data if you don't have to. Okay, so from a capacity planning perspective, the nice thing about Prosymmetry's Tempest resource product is, from a data entry perspective, it's like Excel on steroids. It was a design point to have our data entry look like Excel, because guess what? Guess where people are coming from? Good heavens, Excel's been around, for 30 plus years now. People it's very easy to adopt with this time frame. But look over here, if you will. This is, again, once you have some fundamental attributes associated with your work and people, you can immediately come in here and view this however you want. In this particular view, I broke it out by a strategic theme, right? So here's all our efforts that are supporting risk mitigation work type. You've got enablers, you've got straight up new enhancements here, your KTLO work. From a project perspective, you can see the people, teams, roles. Our automation allows you to take teams from different arms with completely different velocities and map them onto a common timeline with both named resources as well as generic resources. You do this not only at a feature level, at an epic level, but you do it across the whole portfolio. Because you're able to do that, you are able to see how your strategy and capacity aligns across all work in your portfolio. And all it takes is for people to simply size their work, right? Then the automation does all the coordination behind the scenes. Now, speaking of coordination, there's a few other things that we need to talk about here. Whenever you introduce new work into a portfolio, there's always trade-offs, right? Fundamentally, we've been talking about the importance of capacity planning to this whole process, but you can't turn a blind eye to the fact that if you're going to introduce new work and push something else out, it impacts your financials, your CapEx, your OpEx. What are your delivery priorities? I worked with an organization who introduced new work. It was high priority work, don't get me wrong, but they deferred to a well-meaning QA manager who stopped 5 in-flight projects. Some of those were due to deliver within 30 days. Yikes. You know what happens when you stop a project? The project resources scurry like rats from a sinking ship. They couldn't reconstitute those teams for 9 months, right? A better approach, I would submit to you, would have been, hey, let's look and think about what we're going to be stopping to free up the resources needed to do this new work, right, in a little bit more orderly fashion. So you've got to look at all these things, right? And it's a very complicated process to be able to do that, which is why we advocate using this virtual production portfolio. This is a capability entirely unique to Tempest Resource and endears us absolutely to our clients. Because in a virtual production portfolio, and you can have as many of these as you want, meaning your program managers, your product managers, your resource managers, any of them can have a model that looks like this, and they're all coordinated on the back, right? Anybody can come in here and say, here's all the work that I'm doing. You can do this on a whole portfolio basis. You can do it on a program basis. Tie this to your strategic themes, right? And say, what happens if I take this work, push it out? Interactively, you can sit here and play with this with no impact to your production portfolio. Again, this is all in a virtual environment. And you can sit here and optimize, right? You'll see in real time, hey, if I want to push this work out, my inventory team here, which is obviously heinously overallocated, that work will slide out. You can see this from a financial perspective. What are the costs, right, associated with this, which includes both internal labor and external expenses, professional services. If I've got a $500,000, software acquisition starting, at the same time with this project, when I push it, I'm going to be pushing that out. That incidentally is going to impact my CapEx, right? So we tie our dashboards not only to your production data, but we tie our dashboard reporting to your modeling data as well. So you can walk into your executives and say, look, here's what's going to happen if we do nothing. We're going to get clobbered right here, and we're going to have to push work regardless. Either that or we're going to lose our teams, right? Because it's a horrible retention strategy to think you're going to have someone working 165% of their time for 5 months. That dog will not hunt in today's talent environment. That just won't work. Other things that you can see here are that from an art planning perspective, look, the art doesn't look, grossly overallocated here, but individual teams can be. And that's exactly why we advocate from a best practice in scaled agile resource planning that you do capacity planning at a team level, unless you are one of the fortunate very few that have fully cross-functional arts, which is truly rare. All right. So I talked about how our dashboards actually allow you to be able to walk into an executive with options, right? Rather than just complaining that I don't have enough people, say, look, I don't have enough people, and here's what I recommend, right? And it's because we've been able to use this fully interactive modeling tool, and here's what this looks like. I love this quote from Ed Deming. I actually had the privilege to have a discussion with Ed Deming, which is a statement of my age, if you will. Met him when I was in grad school. But I love this comment, right? It's not enough that management commit themselves to quality and productivity. Hey, these platitudes are great, but they must know what to do. And that's what, this modeling capability allows you to do. Again, it allows you to shape your future flow. This is why we were ranked #1 by Gartner in resource planning. It's why we're in the Magic Quadrant, right? It's an incredibly effective way to make sure that your roadmaps, right, which you should now be tying essentially to your best delivery model, which you went out and talked to your approving bodies and got approval for. When you move and adjust your roadmaps to meet those timelines, your roadmaps now not only show what you want to do, but they show what you can do without burning out your talent. All right. I want to make sure that you understand that this is not an overly complicated process. It truly does start with implementing the right technology, making sure that everybody is working on a common platform from a resource planning perspective. It's unreasonable for us to expect that you would go rip and replace whatever PPM tool, certainly Jira and ADO. We don't do those things, right? I mean, you can do that. We have some clients that do critical path planning and stuff for us. We offer those capabilities, but by far and away, the majority of our clients are keeping those tools, and they are doing their resource planning, right, in a tool that allows them to use the virtual planning that's adoptable and will actually, be used from a planning perspective by their resource managers, their project managers, their release train engineers. It only takes 1 to 2 hours a month, right, with the right automation, and you get benefits at every level of the organization. I would submit to you, one gnarly resource arbitration is going to consume far more than this, right? And the fact is, your people are doing this anyway. They're doing it in Excel. It's just that they're not getting the benefits of seeing the holistic availability that they could. All right, last slide here. This whole concept of smart planning, again, sizing, modeling, accelerating your flow. And accelerating your flow is, hey, let's model, fattening our teams, changing the sequence of work, right? Coming up with the best place to sequence this work before we go reserve our talent, right? That's how you sustain strategy execution at speed. It's how, we have been successful helping our clients continuously align their strategy, their delivery, and their resource capacity. It's fabulous to be able to set reasonable delivery expectations with executives. It's great to know that roadmaps show what can be delivered instead of what you want to be delivered, right? To easily plan your costs, right, across value streams and organizations, and to have talent retention built right into your planning process, right? Because you don't want to be in the position where you are inadvertently planning people, roles, or team to be over 100% capacity. It's just not good business. And I love this quote by McKinsey. It's absolutely true. If you're able to, as an organization, reallocate your talent and step with your strategy, you are going to be successful. All right. That really brings me to the end of this discussion. Was hoping to stop at about 45 minutes, and I think I've achieved that. Lindsay, I'm going to turn the time back over to you. Happy to field questions. I really have not been keeping up with what may or may not be being entered in the chat, although I'm very happy to try to address those, and certainly can do that afterwards as well. So let me stop sharing here and turn it back to you. Perfect.
It's super. So thank you for that. I mean, again, making lots of notes here. A lot of this stuff is not something that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to throw the floor open to any questions that people have. Oh, Eileen's got one. Do you want to come off mute, dear? Ask a question.
Hi, Lloyd. Thanks for that. I always love to see resource management solutions after maintaining a spreadsheet for a large global program for too many months. Like most systems, data is going to be the key driver. And I'm just wondering about how much you've had to support organizations improve their resource forecasting ability to get real value out of the system.
It's a great question. So a couple of things. Again, I always advocate starting small. When I first started, who's ever on this call today, whatever organization they're in, I promise you that if you go ask them right now, what organizations typically jack up your delivery, they'll tell you right away. Oh, it's this organization or these 4 organizations, right? They know exactly. And guess what? I would say go start with them, right? Don't go anywhere else. Yeah, I had exactly 3 organizations that I started with. There was a dev team and 2 QA teams, a total of about 30 people. They supported a number of both operational and regular initiatives. And all I did was shirt size their work. I gave them 5 options, right? Small, medium, large, extra large, and XXL, and said, talk to me about what's in your pipeline. Talk to me about the percentage of time that you are supporting business as usual, right? And that was enough. We were way more than directionally correct 6 months out. And so, the better you can get your forecasting, great. But don't assume that you need perfect forecasting, right, to do this. You'll
I think
see
that's
trends.
the other thing. I think that's the other thing as well, though, isn't it? It's just what you said is that you don't necessarily need to forecast every single employee, every single skill across the organization. It's really those skills that you know are always the ones that you're short of.
Correct. Now it's helpful to do that, right? Because different organizations get clobbered at different times. But yeah, otherwise you're boiling the whole ocean, and that just doesn't make sense, right?
Great, good approach. And in terms of again, just because of the work kind of we've done on competencies and competencies assessment, there's some natural kind of agreements that need to be made. And I think somebody, Garrett, made a comment right at the very beginning of the session about just agreeing some terminology in terms of what the roles are called and what the levels of competency are. And I know a friend of ours who, when he went in an organization, there was 250 job descriptions across the organization. So there is, again, some validation. But I really like, and you know, it's sometimes the obvious things you miss, isn't it? I'd never even contemplated just doing 2 or 3 resource types at a time and then gradually doing a roadmap and introducing the others. So I think that's great.
Yeah, you know, I totally agree with that. Listen, the first thing I did, and and I'm not necessarily advocating this, but for me, I couldn't endure working with all the rules associated with HR. I completely went sideways and said, look, I understand this is your HR title, but from a planning perspective, you are no longer a developer or a senior developer, right? You are a mainframe developer deposits, boom, right? Because that's how we plan work. We don't plan work by how HR calls your job title. We plan work by how work flows through the process. So, and there's no reason, look, I kept their HR title in there, right? But we planned by their role and skill.
Okay, brilliant. I don't think there's any more questions unless anybody wants to stick their hand up. No, I think you've shocked and awed them into silence.
I think there's one.
Well,
Lindsay, there is a question. There's a question that arises coming out of that discussion, which is we could see the tool capturing and analyzing and giving a heat map. And yes, we could see the tool allowing you to use the virtual environment to do some what if scenarios and move things around and recalculate. But is the tool able to compare what was actually done, the actuals with the forecast, and start generate some feedback and saying, actually, we regularly get our sizing wrong. We regularly undercall the number of architects resources we need, or how long it takes to do this, that, or the other. Is that those sort of insights would then feed back into continuous correction? You'd get better and better at your estimates, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It will do that. One of the, so again, I actually didn't start incorporating actuals in my previous environment for 18 months because we were getting so much immediate short-term benefit by just giving people a reasonable look at what's coming in the pipeline and how we're going to get clobbered. But as soon as we did start incorporating actual, oh, it's fascinating, right? So we had a big problem where we had operational organizations that would, don't want to point the finger here, but they were, it was very common for them to go in and build time to a project which they weren't actually working on, right? And so for one thing, the project managers could see right away, because we'd load those actuals on every week, right, on a weekly basis, and they'd say, wait a minute, who died and let you build time to my project, right? You just dropped $13,000 dollars worth of work on me. You're not even working on my project, right? So you get to see those things. You also get to see right away which roles are historically grossly inaccurate in terms of their estimates, right? Then you get to go back and have a very poignant discussion about, look, this isn't about chastising you for poor forecasting. What's really the challenge here? Is there so much variability in your work? What are you working on, right? These are productive discussions. So let's take anything punitive off the table here in terms of these things. But what it does show, in fact, is, it's, look, the PMs are doing their best. You're giving them the estimates. It's not the PM's data, it's the SME's data, right? And so, let's don't get, too hard on the PM because some of their estimates are off, but let's go have a discussion. as to why this particular organization is having such a difficult time, in terms of forecasting their work. What's driving the variability, right? And those discussions get to root cause analysis. So yeah, yes, we actually imported our data from a totally different system, an Oracle financial and labor system. And that's a very common thing for us, right? Our software does in fact have a very robust, full-featured time tracking capability, but it's still very common for us to interface with other time tracking systems. The point is that you want to look at an epic and project level so that people can start to see those variances and actually do something meaningful with that in terms of process improvement.
Great. Bethany's got a question. Bethany, do you want to come?
Yeah, hi Lloyd. This has actually been really useful for me. I don't know if you can hear me because it's quite loud where I work, so apologies. I actually work in the public sector, so I work as part of one of the local councils, and I found this really useful because I'm very, very new into this role. I'm a very, very new PMO lead, and I'm kind of building this entire PMO structure from the ground up, if you will. It's quite new to our organisation, so it's been very challenging, as I'm sure you can imagine if you know what I'm talking about there, when it's something brand new. But I was just wondering, because we're quite a highly reactive organisation, because obviously, as you know, when you've got councillors and members, they come in with a lot of project ideas and things which come in where you have to react very, very quickly. How does your software help you plan for that? Just because I'm really struggling at the moment to do a lot of our resource capacity planning, and at the moment I'm looking into different softwares to help me do that. But because it's so reactive, it's very hard for me to try and plan and find a system that works for us. So I just didn't know if you had any advice.
Yeah, no, I love that. Right, that's a very common scenario. So, and I look, I know we're short on time here, so let me offer this as well. Happy to have this discussion afterwards as well. Follow up with you. Just let us know. My contact information is out there, and I'm sure you can reach us through Lindsay or Eileen as well. With that said, yeah. So the cool thing about this modeling tool, when you've got to size your work. So let me back up and say there's a baseline that you got to set here. When people come to you with new work, you say, that's great. Let's go have a 1-hour sizing meeting, right? And don't make it longer than an hour. It doesn't need to be, right? Do shirt sizing, name the roles, right? And again, I would already have in there, what are the commitments for people for a KTLO, business as usual? Once you size that work, you can go in there and just say, include this work in my portfolio. Boom. Immediately, it lights up all the places where you're going to have over allocations and problems, right? So it makes for data-driven discussions, right? About, look, I know you want to do this work. I know it's important, but here's the roles that are needed. You're going to clobber these 3 roles on these 2 teams plus this organization, right? So as long as we understand that, here's what they're working on, right? What do you want to push? Or, here's what it's going to take us. It's going to take 4 months lead time for us to bring in a contractor at this kind of cost. It takes all the emotion out of this, this urgency, if you will. And so, yeah, the tool is incredibly helpful at that. It literally, you can go in and include and exclude work, on the fly, and happy to show that to you.
Okay, so as Lloyd said, you can get in touch with Lloyd. Just drop into LinkedIn if you're on that, and please do give him a connect, and please do feel free to carry on some conversations with him on what you've heard today. You can also go and have a look at there's a lot of white papers and things on their website, so you can go and delve into some of the different areas around resource management. Of course, we went quite deep on a particular subject today. And the other thing is that we said it's a series of 4, and Lloyd will be back with us in July. So you'll be able to join us again for another aspect of resource management. We're determined to get to the bottom of it, and try and get some real practical insights. And I think you'll agree there's been a lot thrown at you today, things for you to unpick. But as ever, we've been recording it. We will get the deck. We will be, dipping into it, pulling out the insights, all of that kind of good stuff. But hopefully you've enjoyed this first session. You'll join us for the next ones. You just need to hop onto the House of PMO on the events calendar, and you'll be able to find that one. And of course, the other 2 that are coming up as well. You'll be able to just have a browse down that events calendar and make sure you join us for those as well. So that's it for now. Perfectly, we're bang on 3 o'clock. Thanks you very much, Lloyd. It's brilliant to finally have somebody who's expert in their field, and you know, let's be picking his brains again in the nicest possible way in about a month's time. So join us then. Take care, everybody. Absolutely. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. Absolutely a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.